Palestine. We're not at war with the state of Palestine. And a British Palestinian journalist has just been kidnapped trying to deliver food and baby formula to Palestine. It should sound outlandish and bizarre, and you should think that nobody would be able to get away with that, but this is Israel. And actually, for Israel, this is the norm. I should, though, say, Stephen, who knows? Some boats may even get to Gaza. Who knows? Some people say that's not possible. Others, say, well, never say never. But it's quite extraordinary that these people, if it was daytime, they'd be able to almost see Gaza. I mean, that is quite extraordinary. It really is very visceral seeing these brave people on the high seas trying to take food to starving people. It's like a scene from the Middle Ages. But again, it's not. That's what the Zionist occupation has reduced us to, is to scenes from the Middle Ages, time after time.
Yeah, scenes of the Middle Ages here, scenes of the Middle Ages in Gaza itself. You talked about Israeli impunity, sort of getting away with this over and over again, not being held to account by allies, as you said, like us. Somehow we're an ally of Israel, but definitely not an ally of Palestine, even though we've just recognized the state. Why is it that you think this continually happens? Why is it that Israel plays such an important role for Western states?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. One is that the Israel lobby is just extraordinarily powerful. It has huge political, institutional media capture in the US and the UK primarily, but other countries too, through a network of Zionist organizations like BICOM or Lawyers for Israel or AIPAC in the United States. I think that's part of it. But I do also think that basically in the post-war era, Israel has been a really important lieutenant for American empire in West Asia. I mean, particularly since the mid-1950s. Remember, Britain, Israel, and France in the 1950s tried to occupy the Suez Canal. The Americans didn't like that very much. It was done without their knowledge. And within 24 hours, the Americans were saying that they would subject this country, Britain, to economic sanctions because we were trying to get the Suez Canal. And I think since then, the US State Department, the US foreign policy establishment, has looked at Israel as a bulwark for its interests, especially after 1979, especially after the loss of Iran, the Iranian Revolution, Shah Reza Pahlavi being as critical an ally to US interests in the region as Israel. Saudi Arabia has guaranteed energy supplies, energy prices. Stability in Saudi Arabia is very important to America. But Israel as an enforcer, as a backstop against an assertive, powerful, coherent Arab nationalism is a really, really important force. And I think that explains a lot. This is a very important part of the world, strategically because of its location, because of energy, but also Arab nationalism, an idea of a nationalist awakening among hundreds of millions of people is a very dangerous thing if you're the global hegemon.
Yeah, exactly right. Especially in such an asset-rich part of the world, the idea of pan-Arabism must be terrifying not only to states but also to corporations, which so often have much more power than states these days. Not all of them, of course, not all states, but but many. Aaron, I was going to ask you. We're seeing. We've got a particular view of what we're seeing here. We understand the mission of the flotilla. We understand why people might undertake such a brave action at such levels of discomfort and danger, ultimately, in order to end a horror which has become unbearable, not for governments, not for Western governments, but for those of us who have any kind of moral compass, I suppose. How do you think this is being received in Israel? What do you think Israelis are seeing, and how is it being presented to them?
Well, it's hard to know because two things here. Firstly, as I've said, there's a very organized Israel intelligence information network to fundamentally mislead people in this country as well, by the way. Polling, for instance, shows that a plurality of Brits think that we should, or maybe even a majority, think that we should recognize the state of Palestine. I think it actually was a small majority. But then you get polling by the Telegraph, which has a misleading question or a leading question, which says 9 in 10 Brits don't support it, which is just not accurate. I take YouGov and the robust questioning they had over that. But then, of course, you get these Zionist influencers, especially on X, but elsewhere too, in the press, in legacy media, pointing to that as, a source of illegitimacy for our government in this country. Now, I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer, but the British electorate voted for the guy. He didn't get a huge mandate, but he's got more of a mandate than anyone else. So that's part of it. There is if you consider the intense and extraordinary information effort, the information warfare that's waged against people in this country by pro-Israel Zionist influences, imagine what they're doing to their own people. That's the first one. You have to re-brainwash people. That's not to suggest that if that stopped tomorrow, that Israel would be pro-Palestine and it would be kumbaya and holding hands. But the levels of violence being inflicted on Palestinians on a daily basis is something that has to be either shielded from the public or has to be explained through quite arduous and frankly misleading ways. But that's part of it. But then I think another part is that it's a state which has now committed a century to progressively dehumanizing Palestinians. And when people compare it to the Third Reich, people get upset. Some people say, that's an anti-Semitic trope. I could see why you would say that, of course. The Third Reich killed millions of European Jews, among other people. But the reality is you do have this nation state with a supremacist ideology, which has spent a very long time diminishing the value of life of a specific population. So if you want to compare it to the Third Reich, I think that's quite reasonable. Apartheid South Africa is probably a better bet. But it's been a very long time in the making. There are multiple generations raised like this. Stephen, there was a video I saw the other day which really struck me. There was a guy who was with the Golani Brigade, and he was screaming to a tribunal. And he said he hadn't been given disability payment by the Israeli state. And he said, I killed 40 people for you, and my own mother has to pay for my hospital bills. And I think this is a really, really important point, that there are Israelis, like you said earlier on, and I think this is the fifth wave of conscription now. There are Israelis who are killing children, who will have nightmares the rest of their lives, will shit themselves, will have PTSD, will have absolutely no emotional regulation. Their lives will be destroyed. And that is for a political project which I seriously believe benefits very, very few people. As Daniel Levy said earlier on, Israel will not have security and stability and peace if it lives like this. It cannot. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's in this tailspin of death and terror which reverberates back on itself. So I think you do have to lie to a lot of people a lot of the time to insulate them from that truth.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although it doesn't really explain why recent movers, people who've moved to Israel, are so supportive of the IDF and Israel's genocidal activities in Gaza. They haven't been raised for generations. I mean, I don't know. There are some questions about schools in other countries and the kind of mythology of Israel that's sort of pumped out there. Perhaps that plays a part of it, but it's not the same kind of statewide indoctrination or project of demonizing a people. And yeah, so but I think that is largely the correct answer. Sorry, go on, Aaron.
No, I do agree with you, but look, it's fair to say that British Jews who are supportive, and by the way, you get British Jews going to they're joining illegal settlements in the West Bank and so on. That happens all the time. It happens literally every day, or American Jews. And you're right, they've not been raised in that same environment, and so actually, I think they should take far more responsibility for their views and actions as a result. But look at any diaspora. If you think about it in a way, the quote unquote Britishness of Northern Irish Protestants is more British than people on the mainland, or the Greekness of Greek Cypriots is more Greek than the Greek mainland. You could maybe draw an analogy there, which is that that separation almost can lead to an even greater sort of veneration and reverence for the state. And there is, as you sort of implied, there is a massive effort to educate young Jewish people in a certain way. in a supremacist way of thinking. And I'm sure many people watching or listening to this, they will know Jewish people in their own lives who say that's happened to them. I mean, I have a couple of friends who they said that's what happened, right? They genuinely were led to believe until maybe their early 20s, where they could find out stuff for themselves, that all these people were evil, the Jewish people were good, the Jewish people were inherently better, and the Jewish people deserved the land. That's a supremacist ideology, and it is taught outside Israel's borders too.
Aaron, I'm going to stop you there for a minute because apparently we can get some audio from the Metek who are speaking to the public, taking questions. So let's have that now.
We need the waypoint position. You could provide that for someone. Yeah.
Hey, wait. You come on.
Wait, is the captain? What? Sorry?
We seem to have lost the Metek stream there. They were trying to answer questions from the public. The audio wasn't great, but perhaps you managed to pick something up from what they said there. But the stream seems now to have dropped. Let's go back to Aaron, if he's there. Aaron, we were talking about supremacy there before we broke to try and hear what was being said on the Metek. One of the interesting things about South Africa under apartheid is that actually plenty of white people from the UK moved there because some people just are drawn to a kind of supremacy. And of course, increasingly people are using the term Jewish supremacy to describe Israel. And I suppose, just like any other group, some members of it are drawn to a certain kind of supremacy. Aaron there? All right, we seem to have lost Aaron, but the Metek, I think, is still audible. So let's go back to them for a moment.
Watching this video means that I have been kidnapped by the next kidnapping. I just want to say
Say that again?
Thank you, Wally.
Who are we missing right now?
Karim, Karim, come up slowly. Tranquilo.
Karim.
Karim.
Are you kidding me? This is
So that was the Metek. That is the Metek that we're looking at now. They were trying to answer questions from the public. The audio wasn't great. They were succeeding somewhat. That's a friend of the show, friend of Novara Media, Ty Hickey in the front right. They've now gone back to a position we've seen them in many times before this evening, hands up, sitting in their positions. IDF apparently surrounding them at this moment. Previously, we've seen them sprayed repeatedly with water cannons. Now looks like this might be the moment that there's some kind of actual interception rather than the sort of drawn out torture, as Aaron described it earlier quite correctly, that the IDF has been inflicting on them. In the meantime, someone in the chat asked, why are the legal support boats sailing away? That's the Summertime and the Shireen. After Shireen Abu Akleh, of course. Those boats will be sailing away because their job is to provide legal support for those who are detained, not to be detained themselves. They can't risk detention because in that case, they won't be able to be on hand to provide the legal support that those in detention who are offered deportation orders or trials might need. So they were only ever supposed to accompany the boats, helping them legally as they went along, but not themselves be intercepted. That's why they've turned around and why they're no longer heading towards Gaza. Aaron, I believe we have you back now.
I've always been here, Stephen.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you before, so I didn't realize. I mean, we have you back technically. We saw these scenes there of the crew of the Metek with our own Ty Hickey on board, trying to communicate with the public. That's been a really central part of this flotilla, is the constant communication with members of the public, letting them know what's happening every day, or even sometimes every hour of this journey. What is the purpose of that kind of intensity of communication with the world as they embark on this voyage?
Yeah, it is quite remarkable. Stephen, I've got a question for you because you've been so on top of this story for so long. I mean, probably top three most informed people in terms of the British media. Kind of media. Did you think they would get this close to the beaches of Gaza?
I thought they would get to around here. I mean, the Madeleine got to around, I think, 100 nautical miles away. The Handler got closer, or maybe it's the other way around. I mean, 50 nautical miles away is the closest that anyone's come on a boat in recent years. And they're about that now, I believe. So perhaps I didn't expect them to get quite this far. 100 was where the 2010 flotilla was intercepted. 100 was where I think the Handler was intercepted. 50 or maybe 70 the Madeleine. So it may be that they have actually come the furthest. So no, I take it back. I am surprised that they've come this far. I think part of the reason they've been able to, though, is the size of the fleet. And the reason I say that is not because I think that the size of the fleet has been particularly intimidating to the IDF. I think the IDF, would have come out to sort of deal with whatever size fleet had arrived near Gaza. I think it's rather that operationally it makes sense to let the boats come close to shore because you have so many people to transport and so many boats to transport back to Israel. As we said many times, nearly 500 people have to be carried away on essentially water buses between this kind of kettling site where they're being surrounded, and one by one the boats are being disembarked. 500 people have got to be transported to Israel for processing. Those boats have all got to be taken back to Israel as well. That's a very long process, and the further out to sea you are, the longer that process is going to take. So I guess allowing them to come closer is part of the operation of dealing with such a large fleet operationally. I don't know. What do you think? What were your thoughts? Did you think they'd get this far?
Well, I think that explanation is a good one, and I agree with it now. But it's pretty extraordinary, Stephen, that, you know, when day breaks tomorrow morning, if they're still in the vicinity of where they presently are, you know, you will be able to, I presume you'll be able to see Gaza with a bit of help. And they started this in Europe. It's been a very long journey, but they really took it. They took it the distance. And I mean, I was getting emotional, Stephen, at just the thought of them being able to see Gaza, frankly. And I have to say, and I'm not a very sentimental person. I'm like the least sentimental person I know. This whole 12 hours, I've been close to tears watching it, because these people are so extraordinarily brave. We are looking at some of the bravest people you can imagine. Three British aid workers were killed by the IDF, and these people are risking a lot. They really are, and they're risking it because kids are being shot by snipers. And our government, our own government, doesn't seem to have much of a problem with it. They've done useful things like recognise the state of Palestine. But you had Rachel Reeves at Labour Party conference saying that, I can't remember verbatim, something to the effect of, we will be friends with Israel yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And, you know, you have to ask the question, what conditions have to be met for people like Rachel Reeves not to be friends with Israel? I mean, I think that's a really important question. What do they have to do? You know, snipers are killing toddlers. They're shooting them in the head. Tens of thousands of people have been killed. I think more than 100,000, but right now we don't know. More munitions have been dropped on Gaza since October 2023 than Hamburg, Dresden, London combined over the entirety of the Second World War. What do they have to do for you not to support them? And these people, these brave people, are defying certainly the political consensus in this country. And you know what? I'm not saying this is bullshit to make people feel good about themselves. That's how change happens.
That is how change happens. And I honestly believe that the images that we're seeing tonight, I'm so glad that they're being recorded for posterity, because I think these are the kinds of images that will change people's minds, because it makes something look possible that seemed absolutely impossible. I interviewed Yusuf Omar earlier, and he said really what they carry is hope, which is what people need in order to change things. They need to think that change is genuinely possible. And that's something that, we're seeing here, and that's being recorded for posterity. It almost seems as though even if they don't they haven't made it to Gaza, and I don't think anyone thought they ever would make it to Gaza. It's sort of impossible for civilians to break through a military like Israel's, which is not just the military of a nation state, but a kind of proxy military for an entire Western infrastructure. Impossible for them to make it through. But the impossibility of that doesn't matter, because what they've done is they've created the confrontation, and they've made it so visible. And I think that does give people hope, and that is the impetus for all kinds of change. I think we're going to try, Aaron, if you don't mind, to go back to the Matek for a minute, because apparently there is some audio, and I think people are keen to hear what they might be saying on board.
Karim, Karim. Okay, you can come up careful. Tranquilo, tranquilo.
Stop the motor. Stop the motor.
Let's put on the light. Put on the light of the video. Somebody give me a light. Headlight.
That was the Matek. We had the audio there. You heard the IDF surrounding it, telling them to stop their engines. They were kind of laughing at that and mocking the Israeli accent in return. It doesn't look like they've got any intention of stopping their engines at all. Aaron, before we went to the Matek, we were talking about the sort of the hope and the way that change can happen. We've seen earlier this evening that Italy's largest union has announced a general strike over the flotilla handling. We know that there's going to be a action in Parliament Square tomorrow evening at around 5:00 to make sure that the government, or to pressure the government into making sure that British citizens are protected on board. Earlier we saw protests, spontaneous protests in, I believe it was in Lisbon, was that right, Darius? In Brussels, sorry, it was in Brussels. We saw in Naples, people and union workers blocking the trains. We saw protests significantly smaller, it has to be said, in Berlin. Do you think we're going to see more like this, Aaron? Do you think this is we're going to wake up tomorrow to a kind of global movement on the streets about the flotilla this evening?
Well, in a way, I think it's a bit better than that. You know, this movement, and I don't like that word sometimes, movement, because it can be used quite fatuously, but there's clearly been a massive response and support to Palestine globally, which is unprecedented. You could call it an awakening, really, in a way. Obviously, many people knew about what was going on before, but I mean, the scale is just quite extraordinary. Look at opinion polling in regards to support for Israel in the UK and the US, many places. It's really changed in the last 18 months. And so I think you will see large protests in a number of places. There's that strike in Italy on October 3rd, maybe. Looks pretty likely at this point. But I think, beyond that as well, this is not a flash in the pan. This is not several hundred activists in, the Eastern Mediterranean who are detached from a broader body of public opinion. And that's what is really critical. This is an expression. What you're seeing right now is an expression of how hundreds of millions of people feel in the West, right? And that's the key thing, right? The West is the quote unquote international community as far as, the G7, the powerful countries are involved. We're not talking about, Brazil or India or China, but the publics of Western Europe, Britain, Australia, US, Canada. There has been a real big shift in these places in terms of what's going on. So whether or not this or that protest happens, which they will, that's inevitable. I think this is one snapshot, and it's a very powerful snapshot. I was moved to tears a few moments ago. It's a very powerful snapshot, but it's one snapshot within something much, much bigger. And very quickly, if somebody's watching this, and I think we've still got maybe 8,000 people watching, 7,000 people watching, they might be watching this and thinking, well, why? Why do you care so much, right? Aaron, Stephen, you live in the UK. You've got crap housing. You've got very precarious labor, poor labor rights. Social cohesion isn't what it could be, et cetera, et cetera. The climate crisis. Why do you care about this? I mean, there is obviously the fact of thousands of kids being killed, a genocide, the most horrific war crimes of the 21st century. That in itself is obviously hugely important. But what is happening right now in Gaza in particular is a test case for the 21st century. And I think lots of people know this, and that's why they care. Do we want to get rid of everything that was good? And there wasn't that much that was good from the 20th century, but there were some good things. Do we want to get rid of everything that's good from the 20th century? Do we not want to at least build on the good things? Or do we want to discard them and really live in a world where might is right and, nuclear armed states can have snipers shoot toddlers in the head? And I think people of conscience, whether you're left, right, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. This is a test in terms of what kind of world we're going to live in the 21st century. And I don't want my children, my grandchildren, I don't want them to live in a world where this is normal. I reject that. And I'm not alone in saying that. I don't think that's an activist mindset. I think many people think that. And that's why we're going to see floods of protests. This is not going to stop. Stephen, I know I've spoken for a lot, but I just want to say one more thing. The amount of Labour people I've spoken to, and they say, well, maybe Gaza calms down by 2029. No. Israel is hell-bent on destabilizing the entire region of West Asia. It's its modus operandi. That's how it views its own survival. Its survival is tied up with creating failed states across the region. And so even somebody who's, anti-migration, anti-refugee, I say people like Reform and Nigel Farage and so on, I say they're pro-refugee politicians because they love creating more of them. Your support for Israel is creating hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of refugees. You're a pro-refugee politician. You might not like them, but you sure as hell like making more of them. And so if you believe in sovereignty, democracy, protection of human rights, and look, these things get a bad rep these days, human rights and the rule of law, they're really important. We're very lucky to live in societies where, sometimes that stuff works. And so that's why I think so many people care so deeply about this. This is not, wealthy Westerners who just care about some far-off conflict which has no implications for them. It has massive implications for us. Massive, 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 massive. This is the future of the West. What kind of society do we want to be? And I really believe that.
Yeah, one of the things that's been very striking to me, and I've been thinking about a lot recently, is not just about how this genocide in Gaza and Israel's general conduct and sort of features of its existence in that region have warped a sort of international framework by, which hasn't always worked, has often failed, but in some sense it's kind of had the semblance of regulating how states conduct with each other. But so we've seen that completely fall to pieces. Like, that is in tatters. And as you say, now it's increasingly looking like, if you've just got more brawn, that's all it takes. That's the way in which you sort of create authority and hegemony in the world. But one of the things I've also been thinking about is how the destruction of our government's implication, the destruction of that has also created conditions internally to the state which are degrading for all of us. So, for example, the sight of hundreds of people, now over 1,600 people, being dragged out of Parliament Square for protesting an act of the Home Secretary by the counter-terror police. That is not something that I think many people in Britain imagined they'd see. Or, for example, in the US, the way in which immigration enforcement is being used to imprison thousands of people in, alligator-surrounded camps in Florida, where up to a third of them are disappeared, and it's done with sort of internal impunity as well. And it's the way that the rot kind of moves from the international stage, from this kind of heart of crime in Israel, in respect of Gaza, and then all of the gangsters of the West sort of protecting it, the way in which those states and those gangsters are in charge with internally also have to be repressed in order to allow that to continue. That, I think, is also a striking feature of why, this is so important. And Gaza is not just going to, what was the phrase you used, Aaron? Was it settle down?
Yeah, I think settle down, or maybe, I think the phrase, what they actually said to me, I think was take a back seat, which is just crazy.
It's
just crazy.
Yeah, come on. It's like a state of mind now. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask about is you talked about how there's been this kind, it's not just about a movement, but rather there's a kind of shift in consciousness that's occurred, and obviously a big part of that is social media. We so often are critical of social media, but the flotilla, as well as journalists within Gaza, as well as all kinds of other journalists, have used social media incredibly effectively in order to get their message out beyond the borders of what we talked about before, a kind of controlled press that doesn't want it to be seen. I mean, that's an extremely positive feature of social media, right?
Well, it is, and there's a reason why Benjamin Netanyahu has overtly talked about the information space. They've overtly talked about the front line of the future of this conflict is in the media, information space, social media. They're getting involved now with TikTok. David Ellison, Larry Ellison's son, very briefly the wealthiest man on earth, is involved has huge media interests, Paramount, etc., but now also getting involved in TikTok. So they view this as really critical. The good thing with social media, though, Stephen, is that there are so many different platforms for now. That even if one isn't particularly favourable, let's say, X, I think X is being gamed to the upteenth degree by Zionists and the Israel lobby. But you still have Instagram, right? You still have YouTube. And if you don't have those, you'll have WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal. You can get that message out. So that, I think, is a major advantage. And look, I haven't got huge confidence in corporately owned social media. But I think the plurality of those platforms certainly helps. There used to be a quote about the internet. This is when people used to be real, techno utopians, which is the internet sees censorship as damage and tries to root around it, which is kind of true. Right? Information flows; they try and root around censorship. I'm not idealistic about that, but it's kind of much harder now to repress something than it was, to the extent that actually we've privatized the truth to some extent. The narrowcasting means that people get to view things that they already agree with, and they don't get to see things they disagree with. But it does also mean it's very, very hard to minimize and repress things like millions of people being displaced, or 60,000 people plus being killed. I think it's far more than that, as I've already said. Toddlers being shot in the head. And, I've had private conversations, Stephen, with people about this on the right. Conservatives, reform people even. Some quite senior, not reform politicians, but some quite senior people. And they would say things that you would associate with somebody who's pro-Palestine. They will never say it publicly because the costs involved are so high, right? Because to criticize Israel on, quote, their side will cost them so much. It might even cost them their career. But privately, lots of people feel very differently. And that's not an outlandish thing to think. When you look at a child and I don't like to be graphic here because we've all seen the images and it's not nice to talk about it. But when you've seen a child which is in an A&E and its guts are hanging out, or it's lost half its face, or it's lost arms and legs, which are horrific things to see. I never want to see those things. But I'd rather see them and know that we can pressure our government using those images than nobody see them at all. And I do think that people, when they see those images, it is quite hard for them to carry on as before. And so I do think, particularly amongst the right, particularly amongst people, I'm not saying this to, suck up to them or anything. It's just my experience of talking to people, is that privately, I think lots of people hold very different views to the ones they're holding publicly. Very, very different. And that's because of the thing you were talking about and you asked that question about, which is social media. Once you see one video, I mean, I saw a video the other day of a guy in a hospital. He was a healthcare worker in a hospital, shot by a sniper, shot in the head. I think he survived. Once you see one video like that, you start to think, well, hold on. There's more to this than I'm told through the media. There's more to this than, Israel being the good guys, much more. And that starts with maybe a bit of skepticism towards them. And hopefully the job of Novara Media, the job of activists, and we're not activists, we're journalists, but we're sympathetic to a party in this conflict, make no doubt about that. But the job of activists, of journalists, I think is to intensify that conversation. So if you're skeptical of Israel, I hope you click on a YouTube video where we talk to Ilan Pappé about the Israel lobby over the last century. You think, wow, how on earth did I not know this? That is now the power of the media environment we're now in.
And I mean, social media, you can often imagine it's a kind of very atomized way of consuming content. But of course, people share things. They share them with each other. They have arguments about it. They have conversations. They convince one another of one view or another, or they get challenges to their views and have to reconsider it. So it's not just social media. It's the way that people interact with it and push it on to other people or share it with other people, tell them what's important to them. Aaron, I just want to give an update on the boats at the moment. We've had 8 confirmed interceptions so far. It's now 11:30. This started at, say, 6. So that's 5.5 hours ago. Those 8 boats that have been intercepted are the Deir Yassin, or the Mali, the Hugo, the Spectre, the Adara, the Alma, the Sirius, the Aurora, and the Grand Blue. So that means that there are 34 still to be intercepted. And a rate of 8 in 5.5 hours, talking about just over 2 an hour, just over 2 an hour probably, is making look like it's going to be a very long night indeed. And very long night for those passengers who are still there, getting colder and wetter as they're sprayed. You can see some of them on screen at the moment. They've donned their life jackets, perhaps fearing some kind of ramming, or maybe just getting ready to disembark safely. Now, we were talking earlier about protests, the possibility of waking up tomorrow to widespread protests. There have been many that have sprung up already spontaneously. This is Paris earlier this evening. A bunch of people out on the streets there. We've got Berlin. I'm afraid I dissed Berlin a little earlier by saying it wasn't very impressive, but actually this is very impressive protest in Berlin. They've done well. A lot of people there. A police presence as well, I saw. Yeah, there they are. German police having known to have been particularly aggressive towards pro-Palestinian protesters, especially in recent months. Germany obviously has a quite complicated relationship with the state of Israel, but one that is increasingly coming under pressure as Israel looks more and more untenable. So that's Berlin that we're seeing at the moment. There we are, Naples again. Activists and unionists blocking the Naples train station. It's kind of direct action. It's the kind of thing I think we will see quite a lot of, because it is just untenable for many people that such a brave crew on that flotilla should be forgotten once they're taken off the boats, which is exactly what happens. They're taken totally out of sight, out of our sight, out of their government sight, presumably for at least some kind of period. And we won't really know what's happened to them between seeing them on the boats when the streams go down and when we hear from them after the administrative process. This is Athens in Greece, always a good site for protests. They're not letting us down. They're out on the streets, standing up for the flotilla and standing against the genocide. And as Aaron pointed out, this is all about the genocide. Flotilla occupying us at the moment, but their whole purpose is to draw our attention to that genocide. And here we are in Brussels. We saw this footage a little earlier. Spontaneous, impressive, people coming out and really standing up for their countrymen and women who are now in Israeli custody. What do you make of those protests, Aaron, just springing up apparently organically in response to the scenes we've seen tonight?
Yeah, I mean, the networks that can call a protest of that kind of size are very well tested, aren't they? We've seen huge protests in this country and right around Europe, and the question is, what does it lead? What does it lead to? That's the big question. So I can't speak for other European countries, but in Britain, the Starmer government is such a disaster; it might not matter in the end. But in Britain, their mishandling of this will cost the government, at least, I think, dozens of seats, probably dozens of seats, because I think they're going to lose so many anyway. That is the question. Can that protest and that dissent on the streets, can it?
Oh, I think, Aaron, I'm just going to stop you to go to the stream
please.
For a minute. Sorry, we're just seeing a Israeli vessel move very, very close to, incredibly close, like swinging right past it in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there. Everybody's got their hands up. It looked like a very near miss, if not a slight collision there. I'm not sure which ship that is at the moment that we're looking at, but it's the bottom left on your screen. Everyone awaiting disembarkation or interception at the moment. That was a very, very close call. That Israeli ship could easily have cracked the hull of that boat, which contains, by the looks of it, about at least 12 people, I'd say, maybe more out of shot. Potentially a disaster. It seems as though they weren't coming for those passengers. They seem to be moving around. Their hands are down. It looks like that boat may have retreated. Aaron, that kind of near miss gives you a real sense of, even the potential for unintended danger here. People are out in the open sea. It's dark. People on the flotilla are tired. We don't want to feel too sorry for them, but we don't feel sorry for them at all. But the soldiers on board these ships will themselves be increasingly tired. It's also a big holiday in Israel, and they're not, they're not acknowledging that holiday. Instead, they're out here doing this. That's Yom Kippur, of course. What are the risks here in this kind of operation? The kind of risks to life that are at place here, which aren't necessarily intentional risks, but where things could easily go wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Stephen. You can see now just from the feed, the boats are very small vessels. The larger vessels were intercepted first, but some of these are very, very small vessels, and they could capsize, they could sink. That's not to suggest that's easy, but like you said, if there's a collision with a fast-moving IDF vessel, it's perfectly plausible, and there's enough to be concerned about with regards to malicious actions from the Israeli side. But the accidental one as well is not to be neglected. And you're right, the scale of this convoy is unprecedented, and there's a reason why. I think we talked about this earlier. There's a reason why they are just 50 nautical miles away now from Gaza. Why they've gotten so close? Because it's going to be easier to decant those people and get them back. Whereas if you had them out further to sea, that would be somewhat harder. So this is logistically very, very complex for the Israelis. There's a reason why they are so close to Gaza. And I think it's really important to highlight that a function of that, or a reflection of that, is it's also a very difficult and dangerous operation as well. Very dangerous. And to repeat, these are some of the bravest people you'll ever see. They are sleep deprived. They've been on boats for weeks. They've not eaten, slept very well, and they are risking their lives. They're risking their lives. Like I say, 3 British service aid workers, rather former service personnel, were killed by the IDF. Our government did nothing, right? So the disincentives on the Israeli side aren't as high as you'd hope. Very, very brave people. Lots of danger therein, and yeah, the accident side of things can't be diminished. And of course, sometimes with quote unquote accidents in the Israelis, you don't know where one begins and the other ends. You don't know what's an accident and what's intentional.
Right.
But I think you've made an important point.
Just wanted to reply to someone in the chat who may have just joined, who's asking how many boats have been intercepted so far. 8 have been intercepted so far, meaning that there are 34 that haven't yet been disembarked or intercepted by the IDF. So a long way to go before all of these boats filled with very brave, courageous people, the best of us really, get emptied out by, perhaps some of the worst of us. Aaron, I wanted to ask you about, you talked there about how the UK completely failed to respond to the murder of British citizens working for World Central Kitchen. No criticism really at all. No, maybe some questions were asked, but we were never told any answers. We saw 3 nations, Italy, Spain, Turkey, appear to send vessels to protect the flotilla. It turned out that the story was more complicated than that. They have now left them. They left them as soon as they crossed the orange line into still international waters, by the way, not Israeli waters, but normal international waters, which happen to just be the bits from which Israeli will kidnap you by acts of piracy. Aaron, what was all that about?
Well, I mean, Kieran, who I pray is safe at the moment. Kieran was saying earlier on repeatedly, I'm not a military expert, before giving very sort of articulate answers, which sounded like he was one. My view on it, sort of geopolitically, is that Spain, Italy, Turkey, you could throw in some other countries too, but those are the 3 powers of the Mediterranean, really. France as well, to a lesser extent, but certainly the Italian Navy. Mare Nostrum, the idea of the Mediterranean being quote unquote RC. So the idea that you would just give carte blanche to one country, any country, let alone Israel, to behave how they like and to defy sort of international law, I just think that the sort of the military doctrine and the rationale of a quote unquote great power, which by the way Spain and Italy aren't, but in the Mediterranean they would consider themselves as eminent powers. Certainly Italy would. I think within those sort of hierarchies, that plays on your mind. Oh, well, the idea that we're not just going to let Israel do what the hell they like. Why do we have a navy if it's not to, make sure that proper regulations are observed in our sea? The Turks, of course, view themselves as the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think that's kind of where it comes from. I don't think they really. I don't know if they agree or disagree with the point of the convoy. I'm sure many people in the militaries of all these countries agree with it, and I'm sure many people disagree with it. But it's more about marking a territory in a way. I mean, I don't mean to diminish what they've done, because it was very useful for the convoy, but I think probably a little bit of a pissing contest, especially with the Turks and the Italians, because as I said, they're the sort of eminent Mediterranean powers. It used to be the Brits as well. They're not really there anymore. They left the Malta sort of base that they used to have. They used to watch Gibraltar, of course. So I think that's how I'd explain it. Maybe there's other calculations at work as well. But I don't think Giorgia Meloni said, let's send the Italian Navy to make sure these people are safe.
I think we can now say that there are 9 intercepted boats, which means that there are 32 that haven't been intercepted. I think that's right. So still a long way to go. It's going to be a very, very hard night for both the passengers on board and for the Israeli military. Although we don't mind. We in fact want it to be as hard as possible for them, so long as it doesn't become unsafe. You mentioned Giorgia Meloni there, Aaron. one of the things that I've found shocking, and I talked about this earlier in the stream, but there are plenty of people who won't have been around then, were her comments about the flotilla putting the peace deal at risk if they continued. Deeply emotionally manipulative statement, I think, and also something that I expect shows the weakness of that peace deal if a flotilla can put it at risk. What do you make of that posturing by Maloney, and what do you make of this so-called peace deal that's on the table?
Well, it's ridiculous. I think that's right, isn't it? If something as and we're talking at the realm of geopolitics and quote unquote great powers, Italy, 60 million people. The leader of Italy, or the prime minister, the president is a different person. But the prime minister of Italy saying that something like that can be derailed because of some people trying to deliver food and baby formula, obviously ridiculous. In terms of the quote unquote peace deal, peace settlement, I do think it's really significant. We have Tony Blair basically saying that he can be an Oriental potentate of a Crusader State 2.0, staff with Accenture and Tony Blair Institute cadre. The whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. And again, I said earlier on that the reason why so many people care about this conflict, besides the fact it's a genocide, besides the fact tens of thousands of people are being killed, is that it's a testing ground, it's a test bed now for the 21st century. And I think if it is just sort of given a pass that Tony Blair and Donald Trump and some NGOs and some businesses now get to run Gaza instead of Palestinians, I think that's a really dangerous precedent. And I think, we've basically seen a collapse in preference for democratic values amongst elites. And I think the fact that this proposal is now welcomed by people like, half the cabinet apparently in this country, it seems to have the acceptance of the Foreign Office, the Prime Minister. It's very bad. At least in the 50s and the 60s, people would say, well, the Egyptians should control the West Bank and Jordan should control the West Bank and the Egyptians should control Gaza. Now we're not even saying that. We're saying that a former prime minister who left office 18 years ago should be running it alongside the president of the United States, and that the peacekeeping forces can be from the UAE and Qatar. And let's be honest, these soldiers, they're not soldiers. Okay, these armies aren't real armies. These countries aren't real countries. Saudi and so on. The whole thing just seems like a farce. And, it's one of those where, the media psyops you so much and all the politicians seem to agree it's plausible. But I just don't see how Donald Trump and Tony Blair survives reality. It just reminds me so much of 2003 in Iraq. You saw the statue of Saddam being pulled down in Baghdad, and some carefully selected images and videos of people welcoming coalition forces, occupying forces. And you think, okay, wow, maybe Blair and Bush have got it right. And that didn't survive reality for more than 3 months. And I suspect something similar would happen here. People in Gaza don't want to be governed by Tony Blair.
Yeah, they don't want British Mandate 2.0, and they certainly don't want to be governed. Well, I think nobody in the region wants it to be governed by a man whose expertise is really is creating thousands of militants after a complete political vacuum is created. Just a little update. So we've said that there are 9 boats that have been intercepted. Apparently, that in terms of numbers of people is a little under half. So the largest boats have gone, obviously carrying the larger number of people. So although they've only made the Israeli military has only made their way through about a quarter of the boats out there, they have made their way through roughly half of the people who were on the ships, half of the people who are part of this incredible flotilla, who've made this, really from almost the most western point of the Mediterranean to the most eastern point by boat in autumn, and not always the most contemporary boats. As we were saying earlier, the Sirius is older than the state of Israel, was taken out of a museum in order to make this journey. That's the kind of advanced equipment that the IDF is sending its very best battleships out to stop. Right, what have we got up on the screens in front of us now? Well, we've still got at the bottom right the Metik, I think it is, Ty Hickey's boat. That seems to have stopped. There's some flashing lights on the boat at the bottom. Is that? But that's coming from the life jacket of one of the crew. The Wahoo seems to be still moving. It's doesn't seem to have stopped its engines. It seems to be sailing onwards. I'm going to see whereabouts it is in the flotilla. Oh, it's right at the front. It is actually making progress towards Gaza. It's the foremost boat, just about. There are a few others around it. Also, there are the Adagio, the Ulara. Well, the armor has been intercepted, so that can't be right. Let me update that screen. Right, so. Sorry about this. Well, I wasn't wrong. The Wahoo is almost right at the front, making very good progress. Next to it, we've got the Inanna and also the Awila. But now that's the boat that we thought had been intercepted very early on. Turns out it's still going strong. Very impressive indeed. I guess that at some point the IDF is going to concentrate on those boats at the front of the flotilla as they draw closer to Gaza, rather than kettling it. So you might see a shift in operation. Rather than trying to contain the boats and empty them all within a particular region, they'll create a blockade at the front to try and stop any stragglers from, or not stragglers, the opposite of a straggler, front runners from getting ahead further towards Gaza. Aaron, I guess one of the things that's very worrying about people being taken on board the IDF ships is that their next stop will be Israel, and it will be the Israeli administrative state. It'll be detention. It'll be not the military, but rather the domestic police force or the domestic security force, and it'll be the courts. What kind of treatment do you think they can expect when they arrive?
Well, again, you're going to know this better than I will, Stephen, because you're on top of this like nobody else. But there is the option, effectively, for somebody like Kieran. They will be given the option. He's a British citizen, although he's got Palestinian heritage. I think people from the sort of G7 countries will certainly be offered the opportunity to sort of quote unquote self-deport, which will be quite quick. Kieran said about 96 hours. I think it'd be quicker than that if you sign a bit of paper. The question is, of course, there are 44 nationalities involved here. My real worry is for people from global South countries, people from South Africa, for instance. How will they be treated? I think some people will be treated better than others, put it that way. Somebody like Greta Thunberg or Kieran, God willing, touch wood, they will. Who knows? I mean, the IDF could literally do anything. The IDF kill people, for goodness sake. But they could be out of this very quickly. Of course, Yom Kippur changes that logic a little bit. But they could be out of it in a couple of days. Equally, if people don't quote unquote self-deport, don't sign bits of paper, processing them could take a very long time. So we'll see. I do think the quote unquote peace agreement and this proposed settlement with Tony Blair does change that calculus a little bit. The Israelis don't want to, because my goodness, they get everything they want out of that. And they certainly don't want to screw that up by doing something stupid. Still doesn't mean they won't do something stupid, by the way. But I suspect that people from the quote unquote more powerful countries with more powerful passports, if they sign the right bit of paper, will be out quite quickly. And then it's a bit of a lottery for the rest, really. I mean, I don't know. If you're from Indonesia or the Philippines, you're not going to have the same sort of diplomatic weight as a British or an American national.
routes so strange. I mean, the Adara is one of those ships which was intercepted fairly early on. That was carrying Aaron, Kieran, Andreu. So I don't know if it's drifting around. I doubt it. It's probably attached to some kind of Israeli vessel, which will be used to tow it in, a kind of tug of some sort. They might be attaching more than one, and so it's probably. Well, I say probably. I don't actually know. It could well be shackled to some other kind of vessel, which will be picking up other smaller boats before taking them all to shore. Speaking of that deal, Aaron, where you said Israel gets everything, one of the most chilling expressions that I saw in it, in respect of Gaza, was the mention of de-radicalization. And what's interesting about that is that it seems to kind of put the idea of radicalization when you're an oppressed people who suffered, nearly a century of profound injustice, and in more recent times, extreme blockades, extreme isolation. You can't even order a book before the genocide, you couldn't even order a book into Gaza without it being checked by Israeli officials. And it says that kind of sense of injustice and fury at it, and like resistance to it, is radicalization. What do they mean by de-radicalization? How do you de-radicalize somewhere like Gaza, and what do they mean by it? How do you do it, given whatever they mean by it, is what I mean to say.
Well, put it this way, Stephen. If I lost my daughter and I lost an arm and my wife was disfigured and my house was blown up, I would be radicalized. And becoming radicalized would be a perfectly sensible, rational thing to do. Of course it would radicalize you. If you weren't radicalized by that kind of experience, I think there's something wrong with you. And I'm sure many of the people who are calling for de-radicalization amongst Gazans would themselves be radicalized, quote unquote radicalized, under the same conditions. So that's the first point to make. I don't understand what the appropriate response is meant to be if an occupying army does all of those things to you. If they kill a sibling, if they kill your child, if they kill your wife, if they destroy your home, if they kill your parents, if you see your next door neighbor's children guts spilling out, if your friend working at a hospital is bombed or dies because of a double tap strike, what is the appropriate response if not anger, grief, and a desire for revenge? What is it? I've said this many times. I think anybody who's saying otherwise is lying to themselves, frankly. What I would also say is that it feeds into a really sort of nonsensical Western perspective that people engage in violent acts because of the wrong ideas. If we just get rid of the wrong ideas and we just get the good ideas and we sort of erase the poor thinking from their minds, then they'll do what we want. No, this is about interests. Palestinians want a state. They don't want to be bombed anymore. Palestinians don't want to be killed and maimed. They want land. Kieran, who's now just been arrested, kidnapped rather, has 6 siblings in Palestine. They can't live on the land which belongs to their family for generations. That is not a problem of radicalization. That is a problem of theft. If somebody came into your house and stole all of your belongings and changed the locks and said, you don't live here anymore, I mean, it's like a sick joke, frankly. So I think that whole de-radicalization sort of frame perspective by which to understand these things it's invoked precisely so we don't talk about the root cause of what's going on here. I am hosting now, I believe. We'll be joined by John McDonald shortly.
Yes, I'm going to hand over to you, Aaron. Put the rest of this show in your extremely capable hands. Thanks very much.
The rest of the show, my goodness. But
say that again, sorry.
The rest of the show, our lucky audience, having put up with me. I was going to say, you've done such a tremendous job, Stephen. So if this is you out for the evening,
I think it's going to have to be, because I've got to write a show and host it tomorrow. So I want to be able to do that as well.
Can we get Stephen on screen before he goes? And then that's kind of important to acknowledge his great work.
Thanks very much for those kind words, Aaron.
I think, you've done a fantastic job, Stephen, as everybody has since what? When did you? It's been live since 6, right? Amazing job.
Yeah. Well, it's it's nothing. It's nothing compared to what the people on the boats are doing, and it's absolutely nothing. A little bit of discomfort of having to talk for a few hours is absolutely nothing to what people in Gaza are enduring. Aaron, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you to this audience who stuck with us. I know people have come and gone. It's been amazing to see such attention paid to our stream and our commentary, and of course to our own amazing Kieran Andreu, who is now in Israeli custody. And thank you for tolerating my chatter this long. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, rest up, Stephen. We do have this daily show here every night at 6 p.m. So we need to look after our people, because we're not just here for one-offs. We're trying to bring our audience different ideas, different views, different kind of news. And so, yeah, people like Stephen need to stay fresh. Michael too. Like I say, they were back at 6 p.m. This show is every night on weekdays at 6 p.m. And for people, by the way, that were who were highlighting some sound issues, we have a new computer system coming in right now with all the feeds coming in from the Eastern Mediterranean, down the line guest, host in the studio. Our computer is operating at full capacity. That will be changing soon. We're moving over to a new system. But I can't help but feel, looking at some of the images coming out from the boats, from the flotilla, obviously that's the result of Starlink, ubiquitous, cameras. The fact that we could have multiple cameras fixed on these boats while we had Kieran Andreu down the line giving us audio is quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. That kind of coverage for an outlet like us wasn't possible 10 years ago. It's easy to take that for granted, but that allows us to bypass legacy media. It allows us to do coverage in a way that was just not plausible for an outlet of our size not that long ago. We have John McDonald joining us. John, can you hear me?
Can you hear me okay?
It was in my ear, but it's actually the John McDonald, which I meant to say, of course. How are you doing?
Well, not good watching this tonight by any means. It's absolutely appalling. I've been watching some of the live stream coming out. David Adler, who's a friend of mine from Progressive International, is on one of the boats, and he's kept in touch. But as you know, as the Israelis try to intercept the boats, the standard practice then is to destroy your phone, throw it in the water. So that's not intercepted by the Israelis as well. I'm worried. I'm worried for the people on the boats, and obviously, it's another outrage by Israel. The MPs, a number of us, are contacting the Foreign Secretary, trying to get the government to intervene. There's naval vessels in the area. Why aren't they being used to protect the boats themselves, the flotilla? There's also aerial support, as you know, because the RAF have been used for surveillance over Israel. Why they should be surveilling what's going on here as well. So it's deeply worrying.
Do you have any constituents out there? Because Eva Jasievich may be one of the people that's detained by the Israelis, and I believe she's a constituent of Keir Starmer. Are there other London Labour MPs who have constituents who are going to be affected by this?
I'm not aware of it. So highly likely, though. Eva's another one of these individuals. I take my hat off to them. It's absolute courage and determination they're displaying. And again, I've been watching some of the news this evening with regard to what's happening within Gaza itself. There's some UNICEF have been reporting, particularly with regard to children suffering malnutrition, deaths, shrapnel wounds, and also directly shot by the Israeli drones. And it's just horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And then on top of that, the reports about the number of miscarriages that are taking place, the number of births that are taking place with dramatically underweight children and who are going straight into ICU, all because of the starvation, the famine that's taking place, the malnutrition that's being caused by the famine. So it highlights it highlights the role of the flotilla, which isn't just about the delivery; it's also exposing why why the flotilla is necessary. It shames the world, you know. It shames our country that we haven't opened up and broken the blockade. In other historical examples, we have, and we haven't here. I find it outrageously shaming, to be frank.
John, I mean, you know, your party done something which is welcome in the last 7 days, which is, you know, recognizing a state of Palestine, which makes this all the more extraordinary that you have British nationals being kidnapped while trying to deliver, you know, aid to a country which we're not at war at, which we recognize, Palestine. So that's good. That's positive. It's really important to acknowledge good things. But then I saw an image of Rachel Reeves at Labour Friends of Israel at the Labour conference recently, saying we were friends with Israel in the past, we are in the present, we will in the future. And I asked this to Stephen earlier on. I suppose I'll ask it to you as well. I saw that and it made me think, you know, what conditions have to be met for Labour MPs who are members of LFI or just supporters of Israel? What conditions have to be met for them to say, actually, I don't support you? And I suppose I'd throw that question over to you. What do you think has to happen for somebody like Rachel Reeves or just any Labour MP who's supportive of Israel? What conditions have to be met for that change to happen?
I can't make that judgment. I really can't, because if having seen the pictures we've seen in terms of the suffering that's taken place as a result of the role of Israel and the IDF, if this doesn't motivate people to completely condemn Israel, introduce measures to sanction them, stop the arms sales, I don't know what will anymore. I just do not know what will. It's very easy to get extremely emotional about this because it's so distressing. And some interviews I've done, I've had to stop because I can't cope with it. And I can't understand why don't other MPs, particularly in leading position, feel the same? I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it anymore. And it's all, I mean, I welcome the recognition of Palestine. Of course I did, but you know, that's fine, but actions have to follow, don't they? This week at Labour Party conference, we had the motion up, which was specifically referring to genocide. And what happened there is that, you know, the government inspired another motion that simply talked about the risk of genocide. And I couldn't believe we're still talking in that language when the UN Commission has specifically said genocide is now taking place. And I think part of the reason that the government didn't want to accept that is because they know that legal responsibilities fall upon their shoulders if they acknowledge that there is a genocide. And again, what happened at Labour Party conference, I don't know whether you saw it, but in the debate, seven speakers were called to support the government motion and not one from the other side. And in fact, one of the Unite delegates, Pete, who I know quite well, Pete Bond, he got blocked from speaking. So in his form, he did his best, but they just physically stopped him going up to the platform. What he did the next day, he put on his Palestinian shirt and intervened in the debate on dentistry to raise the issue of Palestine, because it's the only way he felt he could have his voice heard. So it's beyond my understanding now why ministers and why the Labour leadership hasn't followed through the issue with regard to recognition with the actions that are needed. I get so angry about this, really. I don't understand why. I really do not understand why Israeli ministers are allowed to come to this country. You know, we had the Israeli president come here. What's going on there? I've been calling for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador for months now because she's an advocate of Greater Israel. Refusal to recognise the two-state solution, refusing to abide by UN resolutions. How can we allow her to even be in this country, let alone acknowledge the role that she's played? You know, it's beyond me now. I don't know. In some of you know that we've had meeting after meeting in the House of Commons where we've had clinicians who come directly from the hospitals in Gaza to explain to us what's going on. And those clinicians will take us through a description of the suffering that's going on, the lack of resources, and what's happening with regard to the famine and the impact of malnutrition on injured people and sick people. And a number of those clinicians, despite all their experience, some of them have been in war situations in the past, Some of them are traumatized by it themselves, professional clinicians traumatized because this is so horrific out there. Now, ministers have heard that evidence, so why hasn't it moved them to take the action that is required? And I don't know anymore. And that's why we've been trying to say to Labour ministers, they have to be really careful, because knowing there's a genocide and not taking action, they then can be accused of complicity, particularly if you're continuing to supply arms, which they are. They're still sending the materials out there into the production chain for the F-35s. They're the specific aircraft that are killing so many people. So all I can think that we can continue to do is keep the pressure on, but it's beyond. It is now beyond my level of reasoning to explain why Labour ministers and Keir Starmer himself haven't been moved on this. I really can't understand it.
I mean, the explanation would have been, up until quite recently, at least for the first year and a half, would be that, you don't break with the Americans, you don't break with Washington. That's just the orthodoxy for people like Keir Starmer. That's explicable, at least. But I think you're right. It's gotten to a point where dozens of MPs are going to lose their seats because of this issue, amongst other things as well. But dozens of MPs will lose their seats. And it doesn't feel like that's actually dawned on people like Rachel Reeves or senior people in the Labour Party. I don't know about Keir Starmer. Until relatively recently. And I wonder, is it because they're insulated from public opinion? I mean, I know, and people don't say this enough, especially on the left in the media. People like Navarro Media don't say this enough. But people like Rachel Reeves, they do knock on doors. They do listen to their CLPs a little bit. They do have local councillors who can send them a WhatsApp or an email who know them quite well. And they will be relaying this stuff to them. They will be. They're saying, this is killing us in this or that ward, this or that demographic. I'm going to get the boot at the locals next year. And it does genuinely feel like, with some exceptions, that Labour MPs just haven't been taking this seriously. I mean, even Keir Starmer could lose his seat. I know it sounds outlandish. It's not probable, but it's very possible. He could lose his seat because of this stuff.
If I understand what you're saying completely, I do. And I think you're accurate in terms of the electoral consequences, because we saw it in the last period anyway, when a number of independent MPs were elected in seats that took out Labour MPs. But if this is what I can't get, and I refuse to accept, if what we're relying upon to motivate a Labour leadership and a Prime Minister to act on what's going on in Gaza, if we're relying upon just a judgment of the electoral consequences, I think we really have sunk to a level of human feelings that I can't understand. If it's electoral consequences that's going to be the deciding factor on all of this, not the sight of children starving or the children injured or more and more bodies of children piling up, well, I just think it's beyond any understanding of human values, to be honest. But you're right, there are inevitably electoral consequences on this, but there have been on so many other issues over the last year, haven't there? Whether it's the winter fuel allowance, the disability benefits, or the 2-child limit that they've ignored until they've had a catastrophic consequences in terms of the dip in opinion polls and the loss of council by-election after council by-election. But I'm just hoping that there should be more than just an electoral calculation on this issue. There's something about humanity here, isn't there, that should be motivating them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not always that generous with some people in politics, but you're obviously right. I mean, tell me about this, John, because lots of people I've spoken to in Labour, they sort of let the cat out of the bag a bit. They say, well, look, if Gaza kind of goes away by the next general election, if it goes away in the next year or two, this whole thing will die down. And I sort of think that they're living a bit of a fantasy. Is that a line you hear from time to time?
No. On every other issue, what we get is, don't worry about being so unpopular at the moment. Don't worry about being behind reform in the polls. Don't worry about lost all these by-elections. And there's even, don't worry about if it's catastrophic electorally next May. We've got another 4 years to go. Well, I think on all of this, one, I think people make their minds up and on a government and on a prime minister. And then once they've made their minds up, it's very, very difficult to shift that attitude. So I think people are making their minds up now if they haven't already. And with regard to Gaza, it is so appalling what we've been witnessing. I think those scenes will stay with us forever. And again, we've had these conversations. We've raised it in Parliament. We've had meetings with ministers where we've said this: you will be remembered for this for the rest of your political careers. This will stain your life for the future if you don't act properly. And again, we've also said time and time again that you'll be accused of complicity if you don't take the appropriate actions, and you're not firm in those actions. You will be accused of complicity. And I just say to some of my younger colleagues as well that, as you go through life, when you're later in life, you want to look back on what you've done in life, don't you? And do you really want to look back with history, really, to say, actually, as children were being murdered on this scale and there's such deep human suffering, I did nothing. And I think we're trying to wake them up in that way. And if you listen to when there's a statement in Parliament, David Lammy or Hamish Faulkner in the past year come along and make the statements. I think if you're a watcher of these things, initially there were a few people getting on their feet to express their concern about what's going on. Now those statements are packed out, and it's Labour MPs as well as Conservative people like Kit Malthouse and Lib Dems and Independents and others are now turning up in large numbers, and they're not just questioning, they're expressing real anger about the lack of action by the government over this last 15 months. And again, I think that demonstrates a number of MPs are waking up, not just to the consequences, but also to the judgment that will be made about the role they played in this period.
Just to interrupt quickly, on the bottom right there, you can see the Matek, Take Hickey, friend of the show. They have their hands up. Yeah. They were previously intercepted by an Israeli boat. They managed to just carry on. They were told to stop. They didn't stop. They were told to turn off their engines. They didn't. That's moving now center of the screen. These are really iconic images, aren't they, John? I mean,
we've never seen anything like this before. We've never seen it. When they started using the water cannon and then the instruction on the hands up, now the interception, the arrests. Again, it demonstrates whatever we think about social media and the facility to do this, it is really opening up. It's very much, for my generation, as when I was young, it was the Vietnam War attitudes turned towards that once television started broadcasting what was the consequence of the Vietnam War, and that changed attitudes towards that war right the way across America and the globe. Hopefully, the information that's coming out about what's happening tonight might shift a few hearts and minds on the issue. Don't you just want to just absolute respect for the people who've gone on the boats? Really, absolute the courageous determination that we've shown. It reasserts your belief in humanity, doesn't it? When you see people like this taking this risk.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, it's now 2:11 they're in Palestinian waters. It's 2:11 over there. Sunrise is in 4 hours. I mean, some of these people could wake up in the morning and see Gaza. They're still moving, a lot of these boats. I think the Matek as well, although we've lost that stream for now. Maybe I can get an update from my colleagues about what's going on there. And your point about social media and how, we can, and I criticize social media all the time, but without Starlink, I don't thank Elon Musk for many things, but without Starlink, we wouldn't be getting these images and the sort of ubiquity of the cameras, and getting a live audio feed from my colleague Kieran just literally just before he's kidnapped by Israelis. I mean, that was not technology that was there 10 years ago. So that makes you more optimistic about this kind of technology, does it?
There's an irony here, isn't there? There's a real irony, but it's like any form of communication, isn't it? It can be used for good or evil. The key issue for us is how we can ensure that we maximize our use creatively, particularly from the progressive left, to make sure it's used to good effect, really. But here's an excellent example of how it has been used. Also on X or Twitter or whatever, some of the statements that have been put out. I retweeted with a comment on David Adler's statement where he put it out, basically explaining why he was on the flotilla, and then he described his family history. I never knew that his I think it was his grandfather was in the resistance in France, a Jewish man actually within the resistance, and taken all those risks, and how much this meant to David, that he was doing it in the tradition of his grandfather, standing up for human rights and doing what he could no matter what the risk. And again, there's been a number of statements like that on social media, and I think that have brought not just attention to the flotilla, but also an understanding of why people volunteered to do this.
Yeah. There's one of the comments. Sorry, John, for one sec. There's a comment saying Elon Musk did not invent satellites. No, he didn't. No, but this is we have access to these images because of space-based 5G internet, and Starlink is one of those. The Chinese are launching one. I mean, I'm sure there'll be multiple firms launching these systems in the future, but this is very recent technology. We're apparently having communications issues and signal issues because of jamming. That's being relayed to us from people on the flotilla. So this is not just the tech's not working. These are constant efforts to bring down the signal. But we should be getting the tech back up again soon. As you can see on that top left image, on that bottom left image, these are still moving. I think about 5-10 knots, not very quickly, but they're still moving. There's still some momentum, and a lot of the boats that are still going are smaller boats. So there's issues with regards to boarding them, taking them safely. I mean, I use the word safely in I suppose a strange way because they're being kidnapped. But these boats are small, some of them, and they could capsize very easily. I think we've got the Matek back up. There you go. Bottom right. That's really good. Their hands aren't up. They seem to be going again. Goodness knows what's going on there. Woohoo is at the front. Maybe I can get some information about how many ships are still sailing. I suppose, John, you said something about the left, the progressive left, trying to use and leverage these technologies. You just got the Labour whip back, so I don't. I want you to have a peaceful life for at least 10 minutes. But what's your view about how Labour tries to address this stuff in the next year? I mean, recognition of Palestine is a start, but because we can say that they should not, accept the Israeli ambassador, they should get the boot, etc. It seems quite unlikely that will happen. So what are the kinds of demands that people can make of their local MP if they're a Labour MP that you think actually might make some ground?
Sanctions. It's got to. It's the argument that we've been having all the way through. One is the issue of arms, the F-35s, and it's unconscionable that a Labour government is still providing the materials that enables the F-35 to keep on flying. But I think that the pressure has to be on for proper sanctions now, not just about individuals, but trading sanctions overall, and reminding people that actually the role that sanctions played with regard to bringing down apartheid was absolutely key. So we've got to keep the pressure on, because no matter whatever comes out of the Trump initiative, if it flies at all, to be honest, I doubt. But whatever happens, this issue is going to go on and on for considerable time. So we've got to try and force a government to get into a serious addressing of the apartheid regime in Israel itself, the expansion on the West Bank, and yes, the continuing military action with regard to Gaza, the genocide that's going on, So I just don't think we can take the pressure off at all. And I know it's hard to see this government shifting on any of these issues, but it refused to shift on recognition, and we forced it into that. So we've just got to keep the pace going, and the more of coverage there is of